everyone. Welcome to Politics and Prose. I think at least I hope, the worst of the storm is behind us. Thank you for braving the elements to come out this evening. I'm Brad Graham, the co-owner of the bookstore, along with my wife, Alyssa Muscatine, and we are very delighted to be hosting journalist and author Sue Halpern, who's here to talk about her new novel, What We Leave Behind. Sue's lived one of those lives that truly sounds idyllic. For one thing, her home is in the Green Mountains of Vermont, where she spent her time writing books and articles and serving as a scholar in residence at Middlebury College, instructing and mentoring students in journalism. She's been a staff writer at The New Yorker, doing articles on politics and technology. And she's written for such other prominent publications as the New York Review of Books, the New York Times, and Rolling Stone. She's also written 7 previous books for adults, 5 of which were nonfiction on such varied topics as the nature of solitude and privacy, the monarch butterfly migration, the science of memory, cycling in the Adirondacks, and her experiences assisting in a nursing home after she and her dog were certified as a therapy dog team. Now, there was also a children's novel about an aspiring writer and pastry chef, and 2 adult novels with intriguing characters set in small towns and offering complex looks at contemporary life and such themes as friendship, love, loss, disparate worlds, the process of growing up, and second chances. What We Leave Behind is, like Sue's previous works of fiction, also multi-layered. It involves issues of family, relationships, and destiny as it recounts the stories of 2 women living different lives. One, a 17-year-old high school senior who was adopted, loses her mother, and wrestles with questions of identity. And the other, a successful woman, an HR executive in her 40s, whose parents had a failed marriage and who herself is intentionally single, but comes to reconsider everything after a chance encounter. There are other significant characters in the book, including close friends of each of the principal women, and no shortage of Sue's own social commentary expressed through her characters. There's also a very interesting twist and reveal in the book, which you'll all have to discover for yourselves now that I've told you it's there. Sue has said she wrote the book to take a break from the overwhelming and distressing subjects she's been focused on in her journalism, like the erosion of democracy and the overtaking of our lives by artificial intelligence. She needed something to amuse herself, and she wanted to explore some ideas that grew out of several interests, including twins, adoption, and the life choices that we make. The result is this truly very thoughtful and gracefully written book that explores some big questions as it engages and entertains us. In conversation with Sue will be Jane Mayer, who's, I'm sure, very familiar to all of you. She's a longtime staff writer at The New Yorker and author of books on such subjects as Dark Political Money, The War on Terror, the Clarence Thomas hearings, and the Iran-Contra affair. And she's currently at work on a book about the Supreme Court, which we are all very eagerly awaiting to read. But no pressure, Jane. Please join me in welcoming Sue Halpern and Jane Mayer.
Okay, hello. Hi, welcome. Thank you all for coming. Thanks so much, Brad. That was a great introduction. You left out one thing, which is I think I've known Sue since like practically freshman year at college.
Yeah,
I couldn't believe it.
Forever.
Sue was the first year of women who could get Rhodes scholarships when I was at Yale with Sue, and I basically gave away my application because I figured, all right, so she's definitely going to get it, and she did. So it was for preordained basically, but so I'm delighted that she's here with us. The one question everybody always asks, and Brad sort of hinted at it a little bit, but why did you write this book? First of all, I have to say, it's incredibly enjoyable. It was a lot of fun to read. and it has a good amount of a certain amount of like snark and dark humor, and but it also has a lot of heart and plot twists, and I mean it's really a fun read. So what got into you? Because I think of you as a nonfiction writer and a colleague at the New Yorker. So how did this happen?
Yeah, is this working? Okay. Okay, thank you. It happened actually because what we were writing about was so dark. My remit was writing about sort of challenges to democracy, what was going on with elections and the end of the franchise and all of this stuff, and also AI, which I was writing a lot about, which I've written about for years. And it was just so depressing.
You're talking about my life.
I know.
Okay.
I know. I highly recommend this activity that I engaged in. And so it was just so overwhelming. And I went down this rabbit hole of watching these YouTube videos of like twins and twin studies and adoption. Like there's this whole amazing genre of YouTube videos about adoption reunions, like where a 28-year-old woman finds her birth family, and these are mostly produced by the Mormon Church. And anyhow, I just like started watching these because they were.
You really were into escapism.
Totally.
You were desperate.
I was,
Okay.
and so and then I sort of got this idea, and boy, it was so much more fun to write this than to write about the end of democracy.
Well, that makes sense. I have to say, I was struck because the descriptions. I don't want to give away this book, but it's the setting and the characters are exurbanites, basically suburbanites in suburban Connecticut. It could be Chevy Chase or almost any place, but they're driving. Yeah, the things happen when they drive into New York a lot. And what struck me was you have an incredibly sharp grasp and a very accurate eye for what life is like in sort of upper middle class suburbia, and yet you live in the mountains of Vermont on land that is either next to or actually was owned by Robert Frost. So how did you get such a good feel for this? Because it seems so real.
Yeah, I think I have a lot of friends who live in Westchester, and I teach at Middlebury, and 90% of the kids who go to Middlebury have grown up in, outside of Boston, in the Boston suburbs or in the Connecticut suburbs or in the Westchester suburbs. And I spent a lot of time talking to them. And so it seems like it's in the culture.
Is it not your life?
Well, clearly it's not my life.
No, was it your life? Did you grow up
did.
like that?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in the suburbs of Connecticut, right outside of New York. But it was in a time when it wasn't like it is now, where like everyone, like in this book, one of the 17-year-old, lives on Cornell Drive, and all the other streets are Ivies, and it just sort of tells you something about this community. And it's really important in this community that the kids go to really good colleges, because that's how the property values are valued. And so, I remember there was that woman in Middlebury who was like charging $80,000 to get kids into Ivy League schools. Do you remember that?
Oh,
woman?
yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. And
Right.
you and I talked about that for years, because we had kids who were about to go to college, and we found this distressing. So, like, it's just in the culture.
I wondered, though, if just to dwell on your own background here for a minute, you may have to lie down on the couch for this part of the interview. Did your family? There's some interesting surprises in this family and plot twists. Were there any in yours?
No, it was very boring. It was like so dull. Nothing.
So you had to make them up.
Exactly. I really did have to make it all up. But that's what's great about writing fiction. You can say anything. Yeah, you can say anything.
Well, it is just to go on a little bit more about your own how you came about. First of all, did you always want to be a writer?
Yes.
You did.
Absolutely.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. I mean, I think from the get go, and everyone says I had to do some online like interview thing, and it was like, did you always want to be a writer? Yes. What was your most important book when you were, aside from the Bobbsey twins or whatever, Nancy Drew? It was Harriet the Spy, right? And I wanted to be Harriet the Spy, and so yeah, I mean, I think I did want it, and I went to the library all the time. It was like my favorite place to go in my suburban. We actually were members of 3 public libraries where I lived.
And so, I mean, I'm fascinated as someone who's stuck in nonfiction about being able to transition to writing fiction. And to me, I mean, you as a nonfiction writer, you spend so much time, and you know this because you're a terrific nonfiction writer as well. You spend so much time worrying about getting the facts right, not making up anything, checking every single quote to make sure you haven't added even a if, and, or but. Nothing can be made up. So is it liberating to do fiction, or was it a hard leap for you? I'm not sure I could do it, and I don't know how you got to do it. I think it's really impressive.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, it is liberating for sure. But it started out in a funny way when my daughter was 7, and Jane's daughter was also 7. One day, I was working on my second book, and my second book was this book about the people who follow the monarch butterfly migration. I got really interested in the monarch butterflies, but there are a lot of books about monarch butterflies, but I found these people who are like totally obsessed, and I thought they were so interesting, and sort of nuts, but like interesting. And so I was working on this book. And I had, much like your desk, it was like there are a lot of books and there are a lot of articles and scientific journals and all my reporting and all of that was on my desk. And, I was sorting through it and trying to figure out how to write this book. And my 7-year-old looked at me and she said, Mom, what J.K. Rowling does is a lot harder than what you do.
Ooh, sharper than the serpent's tooth. Yeah.
7. And so I said, what do you mean? And she said, well, what you do, the stuff already exists. Look at your desk. It's already there. But what J.K. Rowling does, it starts from nothing. She makes it all up. And that's a lot harder than what you do. And so I took this as a challenge. And the next book I wrote was a novel. And later on, then I wrote these books, and she was like, why don't you ever write something that I want to read? So then I wrote the kids' book, just to, satisfy this child. Yeah,
Really?
Absolutely. So, but it's just it's a very, very different activity. And I actually think in some ways writing nonfiction is harder in that you do have to have this allegiance to what's true. And you do have to make sure that, everything is accurate and you're not making stuff up, which is one of the reasons why I'm not a real big fan of creative nonfiction, because I think it's a dodge. But then you have to figure out, you have this massive stuff, and you have to figure out how to tell the story. You can just put it out there, but that would be kind of dull. So you have to figure out how to organize it in a way that is going to bring people along and make them as interested in your subject as you are. And that's really hard, as you well know.
Well, the thing is, to be able to write fiction, you have to probably reach into your subconscious or some other part of you. I've seen so many interviews with novelists who say that the characters begin to kind of take over and tell them what to write. They almost sort of tell them the story. I think it sounds amazing, but is it really true?
It's so true. It's so true. It's so fun. And in the beginning, I would think I will remember this conversation that my characters are having, and I never. And I have to keep like paper and pens around because I don't remember them, or like I'll just be in the middle of the night and they'll be like chattering in my mind, and I'll have to like turn on the light and start writing stuff down. But yeah, it's a little bit like you create these characters and then it's like they're like wind-up toys, and they just start to have a life of their own, and it's happening inside your brain, which is insane but true. And yeah, it's a little scary, but it's really interesting, and I kind of love it. And it was funny because I was writing all that stuff for the New Yorker at the same time that this was happening. Like these characters were like alive in my head, but I was like writing about, I don't know, Mark Elias or, Mr. My Pillow, Mike Lindell, and who is a crazy person and you do not want living in your head for sure. So this was helpful to keep Mike Lindell out of my head.
When you write a novel, do you lay it all out in advance? Do you know how the storyline is going to go? You have basically two different. You have a main plot and a sort of a plot. At least that's how I read it, and a main set of characters, and then there's a side set, and they interweave. But do you go to a whiteboard and say, this is how it's going to be, and this is how it's going to start, and this is how it's going to end, or does it just take over on its own?
Yeah, I mean, there are people, and J.K. Rowling being one of them, who are really good at plotting out. Like she plotted out all of those books, I think, even before she started writing. So, and you'd almost have to if you're that ambitious with, like, can't remember how many books she wrote, but a lot of books. I am not that organized. I am disorganized, in fact. And so I think the thing I know who my characters are. I kind of know some things about what they're gonna do and what motivates them or demotivates them, whatever. I know something about where they live. And the one thing I do know, and that's about all I know. And then it just sort of evolves. And some of it works and some of it doesn't. You throw things away, add things. But what I usually try to do is know where the book is going to end. I know where I want my characters to land. And this sort of comes from being a journalist, because when like writing like absolute journalism, not like the New Yorker stuff, but like, an article for a newspaper, one of the things, if you have to write fast and you've done a lot of reporting, and you look through your notebook and you figure out, kind of what the quotes are that you want to use, and you know what the tag is at the end, the very end. And so your task is to just get there, right? To get to the end, because you know what the end is going to be. You know what that last line is going to be. You know what the kicker is. And so I sort of go about it in the same way. I kind of know where I want this to go, and then the rest of it is like, how do I get there? How do I get to this end point? So that's the only thing I really know. I kind of know who my characters are, I know where they live, and I know where I want them to go, but I don't know how they're going to get there.
I was interested. The perspective changes a little throughout the book, and particularly there's some parents in this book, and at least as I read it, in the beginning it's a little more snarky about them, and kind of the view of them, the portrait is the way maybe a teenager would see their parents, and you see their flaws and the kind of just all the things that might be annoying to a teenager about grown-ups. And by the end, it's you understand them much better, and it's a much more sympathetic view of them. And I have to say, to get back again to the Sue Halpern story, I wondered if you mellowed in your view of your parents, or if maybe being a parent made you more appreciative of what parents have to do.
Yeah, I think anyone who's a parent, gets a kind of kick in the pants. It was like, oh, I get it now. That's why they did that. I mean, I think we all, and I'm watching this now because my daughter had a little boy, and I'm sort of watching this same evolution happen. It's like, oh, that's why they did that. That's why they were telling me about this, like to do this or that thing. So yeah, I do think like once you have kids, you are much more sympathetic to your own parents than you were before you had kids, when you thought what they were telling you was ridiculous.
I mean, I do think that one of the main characters is, as Brad said, I think is 17,
Yeah.
and I think you've captured that voice quite well. And of course, we were 17-year-old girls at some point in our life. I wondered, is it hard as a novelist to get into the head of middle-aged male characters? You've got a couple of them in this book, and you feel or did you make your husband explain what it was like?
No, but I've lived with him for 150 years, so I've watched him. No, I mean, the thing you do as a novelist is, the thing that's so great about fiction for all of us is that it teaches us something about empathy as readers. And it's the same thing as a writer. Like, you have to be able to imagine what someone else is going through. And I think that's the value of fiction just in general. Like, I'm not necessarily talking about my books or, Tolstoy, which, I'm just saying in general, the value of fiction for the reader is this ability to imagine yourself as these characters. And it's the same thing for the writer. And, sometimes you're successful at it and sometimes you're not successful at it. Hopefully you have an editor or an agent or a friend who will tell you if you're not being successful. And hopefully you're not so bound up in your own, belief in your own genius that you don't listen to them. But yeah, I think that's the value of fiction, and that's why it's kind of also fun to write.
You said, we were talking informally before this, and Sue said she has a favorite character who she loved writing about because every time she wrote about this character, it made her laugh. Who do you want to tell us a little bit about Ms. Botinsky? It's not her actual name, but
No.
it was
Yeah.
Yandel.
Yeah,
Correct?
Marcia Yandel.
Marcia.
Yeah. So Marcia she's just an ancillary character, but ancillary characters can be really, really fun. And she's a kind of a Botinsky. She insinuates herself into this young girl. Remember, Brad said that there's a death, and this adopted child's mother dies in a rather freakish way, and Marcia Yandel kind of insinuates herself into this family, and she thinks her son Danny is like a boy genius, and
I think we all know Marcia.
yeah, she's just like, Danny is like, everything about Danny is the best. Though Danny had dreadlocks, and what else did Danny do? Danny decided not to be pre-med, but rather take up ethnomusicology at Wesleyan, and he's a drummer. He does drumming, which is very disturbing. But luckily for Marcia, his girlfriend, Lark, who has a piercing in her ear, and Marcia's not really into piercings, gets into Harvard Medical School. So it's almost as good as Danny getting into Harvard Medical School. Yeah, she's pretty funny, and she redeems herself ultimately. I mean,
She has a star moment.
yeah, she
really.
does, and it's great. But throughout once Melody, that's the main character, once her mother dies, she's convinced that Marcia Yandel is making a play for her father, and so she hates her. but Marcia is very funny.
Well, I mean, there are romantic sub-themes here, and one thing I noticed, and I don't know if you were aware of this, but in two of the kind of the important love moments in this novel, it's the women who take the risk and make the moves, and put themselves in a place where they might be rejected. And in fact, one is with Melody and
with,
you know
with
yeah.
Colin.
And so I wondered, did you do that on purpose to break with the stereotypes, or was it just your experience and this is what you see all around you?
Actually, it's really funny because in one of them, I definitely wanted the character. So this is the older woman who's, intentionally never going to have a relationship with anyone that lasts more than about 3 days. And I wanted something to happen for her that was more active than passive. So that was intentional. But it's funny with the other character, so this is Melody again, and she realizes she has a crush on this kid and this boy at college, and she's in high school. And originally, I wasn't sure how that was going to go. And I think when I originally wrote it, she wasn't quite as forward with Colin as she is ultimately. And I think it was my agent who read that and he was like, no, you have to work on that. You have to fix that. Which was interesting because I was like, no, I'm sure I'm right. And she was like, no, I'm sure you're wrong.
Really? So the agents really get involved in the sort of character development.
My agent,
who is your agent?
Her name is Kim Witherspoon.
Uh-huh.
She's
I've met her. She seems amazing.
She's very smart. And she just got into this book and it was so very annoying. Honestly, I turned it in and I thought.
I mean, it's your imagination,
right.
But she's got strong point of view on this.
Well, her point of view, so I turn in the manuscript and I'm thinking, I am done. This is good, and we're on. We're moving forward. And she wrote back to me and she's like, "Where's the other half?"
Oh,
and I was like, "What?" And she said, "It just ended and you didn't finish it." And I thought about it for a while, and this was very disturbing, of course, because I thought I was done. And I thought about it, and I was like, you're right. I just wanted it to be done, as you understand that feeling. And so she was right, and I went back, and I wrote more. And then again, I was like, okay, I did it. She doesn't tell me what to do. She just tells me what's wrong. And what you need to go back and think about this. So I went back and I thought about it and I thought I was done again. And she wrote back and she's like, okay, this is better. But no. She pointed out 3 places where she thought it wasn't working. Again, I was not happy.
Is your microphone? I think it.
Did I do something to it?
Maybe here. Try doing this. Let's see.
I can shout.
Mine for a minute.
Yeah. Anyhow, so she told me, a couple places where she thought it wasn't working. So I went back, and it was like as if each time she told me something wasn't working. And we got down to the fact that there was one thing that wasn't working, according to her. And by now, and this is 3 times, right? We've gone through this 3 times, and this is one of the same 5 places, but now we're down to this one place. And I'm thinking about it, and I'm thinking about it, and I'm thinking about it, and I think she must be right. But I don't know. I was just very confused, but I'm pretty sure she was right. I wasn't going to argue with her, you're right, I'm wrong. I mean, I am right and you are wrong. Because I've learned enough as a writer that if someone doesn't get something, it's your fault, right? It's not their fault. It's your fault because you're supposed to be communicating. And so I thought about it, and all of a sudden I was like, oh my goodness, I not only understand what was wrong, I totally understand how to make it right. Oh, wow. And it was just this moment of like, oh, wow. Yes, she didn't know how to fix it. She didn't say do this. She just knew it was wrong. And suddenly I knew how to fix it, and I fixed it, and I turned it in, and she was like, yes. Oh, it was great. But it was, as the writer, I was like, no, I want to be done. Tell me I'm done. No, 3 times I have to do this?
That's amazing. Well,
she's a very smart person.
It's good to have a great editor, and agents can be editors too. But I'm lucky because I'm married to one.
Yes.
In-house help. So you've written for every great nonfiction publication. You've written novels. You've written children's books. What is next? I mean, is it you're going to write like screenplays? You're going to write sci-fi? What's up next?
So I don't know if you saw this, because you can't read anymore. I wrote a piece that was in the New Yorker a couple weeks ago. In there, it's this column called Book Currents, and I wrote about a genre of book that I love to read, and that is, I think, a lot of people would think, I've got a doctorate from Oxford. I'm a pointy-headed person that writes pointy-headed things. But I love reading these cozy mysteries, Richard Osman, the Thursday Murder Club books. And
cozy mysteries, what a great genre.
It's a great genre because, as I point out in the New Yorker, it's like there's a mystery, but there's not a lot of blood. And I like reading them. They're very satisfying, and they're fun, and they're usually very funny. And so I thought, I wonder if I can do this. Like, it's a completely different kind of writing because, as I said, I'm really bad at plot, and they're plot driven. Like, I'm really good at characters. I'm really terrible at plot. And they're totally, totally plot driven. And so that's what I'm sort of trying to do. And I think one of the weird things about me as a writer is I must have writer ADD, because I don't usually do the same thing. Like, I'm married to Bill McKibben, and he writes about climate change and climate change and climate change, though it changes and gets worse. So there is some movement there. But he's really wedded to this one subject, and I think I have, writer ADD because I just keep writing different things over and over and over again.
Well, I can't wait to read the mystery. This sounds fantastic. I was thinking maybe since you've already written a nonfiction book about your dog, that maybe you were heading towards a novel where their animals are the characters. But
I can do that. Maybe that's after that.
Or maybe a mystery involving a dog. So I think we should take some questions. Does anybody out here in the audience have any questions for Sue? Go, if you just line up over there, that would be great.
Well, first I'd like to make a comment about apparently one of the themes of your book, which is about forward women. And I'm hoping very much that that's inspirational to the females in the years to come, because from my own and all my male friends' extensive experience, they're a rare breed, which is a shame. But anyway, my question though is about plot development, and I'm wondering if when you were writing this book, did you find on occasion that you went up a bit of a blind alley with respect to the plot, that some themes of the plot didn't work out and you had to change course and think again about how to develop your characters in the direction you wanted, and was that a difficult challenge in writing the book?
That's a really interesting question, and the answer to that is yes. I think because not everything is plotted out perfectly, and I'm kind of relying on my characters to tell me things about the way things are going to work out. There's sometimes my characters are sometimes wrong, and then I have to go rejigger. But I remember in writing, I was working on I think my first novel, and there was a scene that I thought was kind of great in this book, and I gave it to my agent, and she was like, "This scene, where did that come from? That's not working at all." And I thought about it for a while, and it's like, yeah, you're probably right. So I think, yes, sometimes you go down these blind alleys and they don't quite work out, and you have to pull back. But part of it is always thinking in this sort of empathetic way. What would this person do? What would this person say? What would be their sensibility in this moment? And so that's sort of the driving, for me, the sort of driver of the plot. But it doesn't always work out, I would say. Hi.
Thank you so much to both of you for being here today. My name is Nathan, and I'm very much appreciating reading What We Leave Behind. My mother had some early loss in life that makes me really appreciate the book, and I'm also a recent college graduate from here in the Washington, D.C. area. I also really appreciated the book introducing Sasha Abramowitz, and largely because of work that I have done on issues related to special needs and inclusion, drawing from my own life experiences, the book really spoke to me. And I was wondering two things. What would you say inspired you to write the Sasha Abramowitz book? And also, what do you think are some of the most important ways in which writers can use their platform to advance issues and causes related to inclusion and acceptance?
Thank you. So Sasha Abramowitz, the book is called Introducing Sasha Abramowitz. That's the book that my daughter made me write, not in the sense of, like, she didn't tell me what to write, but she wanted me to write a book about that she wanted to read. And at the time, she was having some issues with spelling, and it turned out that she had a kind of an auditory processing issue, and so she was a kid who was a fabulous reader, and yet couldn't spell and couldn't sound out words, and we didn't know why. And she felt really stupid about that. She just felt really different, and so I wanted to write a book about someone who felt different. And Sasha, his brother, is a boy who has Tourette's, and Sasha feels different because she's the sibling of someone who's different. And so that was my motivation, was to write about, and one of the things, the other thing was, in the school my daughter was at, we had this running club. There were a lot of kids with who had attention deficit issues, and so who couldn't sit still. And so we had this idea that if we ran a running club in the beginning of the day, and let kids get a lot of exercise and get a lot of their kind of antsiness out, and then during the day we would do some running stuff too, and it really helped a lot of kids in this school. And so I was working, with a lot of kids who had learning differences. It didn't mean that they were not smart. It didn't mean that they couldn't learn. It just meant they were learning differently. And so I really wanted to write a book that kids would look at and feel like you did, that they were seen. And I did this really for my daughter in large part. So I think, like I was saying about empathy, I think that's our job. Our job is to tell stories that help people understand other people. And here we are in Washington, D.C., a town that is, mired in a lot of, I don't even know how you would even talk about it, but, we don't talk to each other anymore. And I think, we all have ideas about the other people who we don't appreciate and don't like and have lots of feelings about. And so again, I think that's what fiction can do. I think it can just help us recognize that there are some shared things that we have, and that there are some ways in which when we're reading about characters who are different from us, that we get a feeling of like, oh, I get it. I get who they are. So that's why. But I'm so glad you read that book.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Sue.
Hi, Jim.
I've known Sue not since 17, but for a while, and I have 2 adopted children,
That's right, you do.
and both have met their birth parents. And in one case, it was idyllic, and in one case, it was horrific. But anyway, what I wanted to ask you was about all those hitherto unknown to me Mormon made YouTube videos about these meetings. What did you learn from all that watching that fed your fiction writing?
That's so interesting. I forgot that your kids were adopted, but I knew that at the time. Let me just back up for a second. So in this book, Melody, the 17-year-old, has no interest, 0 interest in learning who her birth parents are, 0. But her best friend, Lily, who was left on a bridge in Chengdu in China, she really wants to know who her parents are. And she like looks at her iPhone and thinks, maybe one of my siblings put this thing together. So she really wants to know. And I had these 2 friends, both men, who were adopted, who had no interest in learning who their birth parents were, 0. And I couldn't believe it. I was like, if it were me, that's all I would want to know. I would absolutely want to know who my birth parents were. But they were just like, no, our life is good, and things are, we like our family, and we're not going to upset the boat here. So that was part of my inspiration. I was like, wow, I am so not like them. In any case, so that, like, I had them in sort of my mind. The birth, so the BYU videos on the Mormon, like, reunification videos of these families, they're always very positive, right? Because otherwise they wouldn't put them on on YouTube. And so, yeah, they're always like, oh, I was waiting for you my whole life. You know, just, they're very sappy. There's a whole genre. I mean, it's not even just the Mormon church that are doing it. If you look at like Kelly Clarkson's TV show, she's often doing this. But they're always very positive, because otherwise, why would you have them on television or on YouTube? But it's just really interesting to watch people who have a connection, but what is the connection? Like, trying to figure out what the connection is, and watching them sort of think, oh yeah, that's my mannerism too. Like, those are kind of interesting things. So, but they're pretty interesting, I have to say. I mean, I spent a lot of time watching them.
Was it a question about nature versus nurture for you? I mean, were you trying to sort of, I do wonder to the extent to which a novel might start with a question.
Yeah. I mean, it was that to some extent. Like, I wrote a book about memory. One of my numerous books. It was about, I had this question about, remember, like, for a while, like, we're in our 40s or something, everyone was like, I can't find my keys, I must have Alzheimer's disease. Remember that thing? Like, I must have early onset Alzheimer's disease. And I thought, that cannot be true. Like, we don't all have this problem, but we're all, like, losing our keys. So what's going on? And so I wrote a book, theoretically it was about not normal memory loss, which is a thing. It starts in your 20s, just for you to know this. Although I did do a detour on that book and wrote this 12,000 word piece for the New Yorker on an Alzheimer's gene. But in any case, I knew nothing about genetics, right? And you understand this because you're writing about a subject that you have to learn everything about. So I had to learn everything about genetics, not everything, because I don't really know that much about genetics, but I had to learn enough about genetics and enough about neuroscience to be able to have a conversation with the scientists about their work. And here's a tip for anyone who has to learn something about a subject they know nothing about. And I don't know if this would work for you with what you're doing, but buy children's books. Yes, you buy children's books and they actually like tell you what you really want to know instead of like couching it in words that you don't understand. So a lot of the work I did was to try to understand genetics because I was writing this long piece about a gene that was affecting certain population and making them much more likely to have Alzheimer's. So the genetics part of it, yeah, I was thinking about nature versus nurture, and I was thinking about my friends who didn't want to know anything about their parents, and I just thought that was so weird. And what were they getting from the parents who were raising them versus like from their genes?
Well, I don't want to give the plot away, but
Yeah, please don't.
they do not all agree on whether this is a good or bad thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
And there were a few other things where you drew on kind of the real world, not the fiction world. And I wondered if you sort of, when you're writing a novel, do you just collect little clips or do you just sort of note things happening? There's a bit about a scandal that involves cheating and on science at Stanford University. And we've seen the president of Stanford brought down by something like that. I wondered if did that somehow accidentally penetrate, or did you put it aside?
It was before.
It was before
was
you
the
predicted it.
It was the craziest
Whoa.
situation. I turned in that book way before that happened.
That's crazy.
It was crazy. So it is it's a scandal. It's not the president of Stanford, but it is a Stanford scientist who does something untoward. And when it happened at Stanford, I was like, whoa, did they read my book? But no, it was so weird. There were a couple of other things like that I wrote about, and then they happened. It was just very, very weird.
Watch out when you do the mystery if there's a murder. I hate to think.
There
Who
are.
it will be.
They're in this book. There's going to be 2.
Ooh, who's going to be on the carpet? I mean, what I've always heard about plotting murders is that they start with the body and then you move on from then it's the who did it, how to
Yeah,
kind of thing.
I think that. Well, that's what that's what Chat GPT told me to do.
Well, I did have a question for you about Chat GPT because Sue actually is somebody who understands technology in a way that most of us who are liberal arts types do not. And I wondered if, do you think we will have real humans writing novels in the future, or you think Chat GPT is going to take this job over?
That's I know that we're worried about Chat GPT writing stuff for us, but I'm here to tell you that so far, so my students at Middlebury, so the year that ChatGPT came out, so that came out in November of 22, and then they were coming back from COVID, and then really it was in 2023 that it sort of hit the college, and so I was asking my students about this, and so I had one of my students go around the library and take a little survey of what was open on people's computer screens. And he told me that pretty much everyone had ChatGPT open. So I did a little experiment, and I gave ChatGPT like a prompt to write something. I was working on a piece about AI for the New York Review of Books. And so I gave it a prompt to write something, and it did. It wrote something, and if you just looked at it sort of in a cursory way, you'd think, this looks okay. But if you actually read it, you would realize like it was just full of like cliches, and it was really terrible, like really, really terrible. So I put it in my piece because I was getting paid by the word. So, yeah, I'm sure it's already writing people's novels, whatever. But like, I wrote another piece for the New York Review about this question of like whether or not there's going to be artificial general intelligence. Like, is it going to be smarter than us? Blah 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 blah. the thing is that the thing it doesn't have is experience. It doesn't have feelings. It doesn't have emotions. It hasn't had heartbreak. All these things that go into writing. It doesn't have empathy. It's like writing a novel. It doesn't have any of that stuff. It has words. It has math. It has things that people have already done, but it doesn't have creativity. It really doesn't. Not yet, anyhow. So it's possible. And if you read stuff online, you'll know what's been written by AI and what's been written by a person, unless they're a really terrible writer, and then who knows. But and so, yeah, I mean, probably there are already novels being written by AI, but they're not going to be Tolstoy. They're not going to, they're not going to be great. And hopefully we still care about, great writing or fun writing or voice. Remember when we had John Hersey as our teacher?
We did.
And his whole thing was voice. The writer's voice, you had to find your voice. AI is not going to find its voice. It's going to find your voice, but it's not going to find its voice. And I think that's really important.
You've got one more question here.
Yeah.
When you're building the characters in your mind, I wondered if your interviewer here, when she's studying these people and getting all their quotes, is she also building sort of a model where she can kind of predict where she needs to investigate next? Because if that character that you have was in her mind, she'd be thinking, oh, that guy is going to pull that stunt next, and I bet he did. So if I go there, I'll maybe be able to find it.
Well, there is that aspect where they overlap, because you really are, as a nonfiction writer, trying to understand the character of the person. I mean, I'm always really interested in things that a lot of investigative reporters are not interested in. I'm really interested in people's backgrounds, how they grew up, and what I think you couldn't believe how many people who are sort of, you might think of as evil oligarchs, actually have terrible fathers. It starts early. And so it is the Koch brothers, for instance. It's really interesting. It is something of the same thing. It's studying them. And you also have to try to bring some empathy into it, even with people who you might disagree with, because otherwise you're going to have a cartoon.
Right.
It's not going to be for real. And it's not really true. So, because everybody has some all these different aspects of them. But thanks for asking me a question, but it's really for Sue. Hey, we've got one more question behind you. There you go.
Hey, Sue. Hi, Jane.
Hi, Jim.
I only know people here named Jim.
I wasn't going to ask a question, but I'm from that generation where when I was in high school, it seemed like everyone had to read John Hersey's Hiroshima, and then I became a nuclear historian, and now there have been recent books about John Hersey, including about John Hersey's relationship with JFK, and even taking as his wife the girl that JFK wanted to marry. But I had no idea that both of you had a John Hersey connection. So I'm just curious if you could recollect that experience.
Sue, you have to tell your story about John Hersey.
I can't tell that story.
Wait,
The next book.
Expletives deleted.
I can't tell it. But I'll tell you a different. I'll tell you a different John Hersey story. So when I was at Oxford, I was very conflicted as to whether or not I wanted to write my dissertation or whether I wanted to write a novel. And obviously, you can see that this tension has been in my life the whole time. And so I decided to write a novel. So I took John Hersey's fiction class, and Jane took John Hersey's nonfiction class.
Exactly.
Okay. So anyhow, I was not writing my dissertation, and instead I wrote a novel. And I didn't know how to write a novel. I liked reading them. And anyhow, I wrote this novel. I think it was a novel. It was long. Had some characters in it. And I gave it to this fancy agent in New York who read it over. It was Ken Auletta's wife. What's her name? Binky Urban. Mm-hmm. Gave it to her. Urban. Yes. And so she read it overnight, and she was like, "This is great. It's going to be a bestseller," and all this stuff, And I'm 3 or 4, and I'm so excited. and she starts sending it around, and it gets rejected, and it gets rejected, and it gets rejected. Then some editor at Rand House like takes me out to lunch and says, here's how you have to fix this book. And basically it was like, this book is terrible, but there's like a kernel of an idea in here, and maybe you could rewrite it. And I was like, having a nervous breakdown. No, I'm not going to do this. So I went to visit John Hersey, who was living in New Haven. And I told him what it was going on with this book. And he took me aside, and he was like, he was very gentle and very nice. And he said, when I wrote my first novel, eventually what I had to do was file it away in the circular file on the corner of 74th and Park.
Well, that's a great story. Well, Sue, thank you so very much for coming to Washington. I hope everybody picks up a copy of the book. It's a really fun and interesting and rewarding read.
Thank you, Jane. Thank you for doing this.
So my pleasure.
I feel sorry
My
for you.
pleasure.
I made her do this.
I had so much fun. I had so much fun reading a novel for a change.